Metallica has recently announced their new Metallica Podcast, where James, Lars, Kirk, and a bunch of guests talk about Metallica's history. And a couple of days ago, they released their second episode where they talked about Bob Rock's importance. And today, we are reviewing it, so let's start. Metallica started out the episode saying that they knew that they needed something to change, and that they knew that they wanted firstly to change their sound from the 80s to become what we heard in the 90s, and also they needed some sort of guidance to help them achieve the new style, and the guy that guided them was Bob Rock.
We noticed live that, all right, the set list was 10 songs, or something. I want to play more songs, so let's write some shorter songs. And that's where all that came about, that we might need some guidance with production. We knew that.
We know we've got to change. We know we've got to turn left or right.
As Kirk said, Bob was trying to work on every member of the band and try and get the best out of each one of them.
Great thing about Bob, I think, that we all experienced was he kind of underlined all the individual dynamics within all of us, dynamics in all our playing. He brought out a lot of the subtleties in our playing that I didn't even think we were even aware of. And that was just a great thing. He was just so important in putting our heads in different places that musically.
And of course, Metallica were getting super defensive about Bob Rock's interaction with them and attempts of contribution to their music, that they went on to hate having him in the studio, because Metallica was like their thing. As Kirk said, he said that going into the studio was like going to war.
At the end of it, it felt like, going to the studio was like going to war.
Bob Rock sat there listening to them play and had his notebook where he wrote the notes and thus suggesting musical ideas to the guys. And they were so confused and triggered and rather sarcastic about the whole thing, as Lars said.
I remember, the first time we got together with Bob Rock in a room with our instruments. I mean, we're sitting over here in Point Richmond in a rehearsal room, and we're playing some of these songs, and all of a sudden he had an idea. Why don't you try to do a different key there? I was
No.
like, holy fuck, what?
Modulate.
Shut up.
Yeah, modulate.
Don't get...
He said, modulate there.
Yeah, don't fucking tell us what to do. These are our songs, and fuck you. Go, back to where you came from.
So there was this huge lack of trust of the guys in Metallica towards Bob Rock, since they didn't want anyone fucking with their music. As Kirk said, in the 80s, it was like the 4 guys in Metallica and then just an engineer, nothing more.
You have to understand that for those first 4 albums, it literally was us 4 and an engineer.
And James was also afraid that when Bob arrived, suggesting ideas and recommending stuff and all of that, Metallica would lose their integrity and control of the band and of the record.
I think a lot of the fear for me was seeing other bands that have lost their drive or their integrity by allowing a producer to really just take it over.
And Kirk added that sometimes other musicians, when they get producers into their making of their records, they lose control of it and other musicians come into play, and they were afraid that was going to happen to Metallica.
Yeah, and you hear about that a lot. A producer coming in and all of a sudden telling people how to write the songs, play the songs, talking to them about their approach, their attitude.
Or when the band's gone, they're re-recording stuff over there.
Yeah, they're bringing in other musicians.
So in conclusion, they were afraid that the writing process would slip out of their control, and thus all the energy was put into defense against Bob Rock. Metallica on the podcast also talked about Bob Rock's contribution and importance when it comes to the writing process of the Black Album. One of the things that Bob Rock noticed was how all the songs were in E standard tuning, and he thought that was kind of boring and that Metallica needed more diversity, so he suggested tuning down Sad But True from E to D standard tuning, which we all know had a huge influence on the track.
And we went through all the arrangements and found the keys. And basically what I did in pre-production, I would write down kind of the tempo of the song, because tempo is important, finding the right tempo for a song, because one beat can make such a difference in terms of feel. And then the keys. And after 6 songs in, the key was always E. And, and I said, why is everything in E? And James said to me, it's the lowest note, right? And I'm going like, yes, but Sabbath and all these other bands tuned down to D. So they tuned down to D, and we did Sad But True, and that's in D, and that had a huge influence on the sound of Sad But True.
They also talked about the absence of bass on Injustice for All, and how Bob Rock would not allow such a thing to happen on the Black Album. Bob Rock knows that the bass is as important as anything else, and that's why Jason was very happy when Bob Rock showed up, because he knew that the bass frequencies would be clear and loud on the mix.
I was happy when Bob Rock showed up because of the bass frequencies he was able to achieve on the other records, and the way he came in with that attitude and knowing how to reach that.
Bob Rock also, as we know, saw Metallica on the Justice Tour, and he knew that the live performance vibe was never captured of any of their other records, so he wanted to capture that on the Black Album.
The thing is I saw them on the Justice Tour, and when I saw them, I had bought the Justice album, and, I kind of got what was going on. Everybody had, a Metallica t-shirt, so I bought that, and I listened to it. To me, especially after seeing them, I went, they don't sound anything like that record live. What I saw live was this fucking huge, weighty, sonic thing that's just not as represented in studio. I never knew I was ever going to work with them. But to me, when they said, we like that, and then when I heard certain songs when they came up to Canada, I just went, I can do this, because what I saw, I can do this sonically.
They also talked about Bob helping James in singing and how he advised him not to double the vocal tracks, but rather be more creative on the vocal stuff. And we saw how it added a huge dimension and improved James's vocals on the Black Album.
When it came to the Black Album, Bob, that was one of his main goals. He said, you know what? We're going to get some character out of your voice. We're going to stop doubling it, because, when you double your voice, you don't want to do something too crazy that you can't double it, So just doing a single voice, single take was a new thing for me, and I really liked it. I was able to get more creative, take a few more chances here and there. So that was another great adventure that Bob pushed me into.
As we all know, Metallica weren't very fond of Mötley Crüe in the 80s.
You came here to see fucking spandex and fucking makeup and hairspray and all this crap. This ain't the fucking band!
And we also know that Bob Rock worked with Mötley Crüe, so you would see why James said in the episode that Bob was sorta the enemy that they let in their studio. He came from the other side, the enemy side.
Well, yeah, you bring up a good point that it was like letting the enemy into your inner circle. It really was. Here's a rehearsal place where we didn't really have anybody ever show up in there, and then all of a sudden there's this producer from the other side, he's sitting in here. What does that mean to us? Have we made the wrong choice? So,
however, even though Metallica had a lot of problems with Mötley Crüe, but they knew that the production on their records was great and top class. I really also like how Kirk labeled the conflict between Metallica and the other guys, Bon Jovi, Mötley Crüe, and the side of rock and roll that were beautiful people. And they saw Metallica as the ugly outsiders.
All these bands who weren't us, and all these bands who kind of like looked at us as kind of like ugly outsiders, he was one of them. He was from that side, the opposite team.
he was on the beautiful side. We were the ugly
exactly.
runts.
I didn't want to say it. But he.
And also James said that they wanted sort of a hybrid between Metallica's music and the A-class production on the Mötley Crüe albums.
We were certainly interested in the sonics.
Yeah.
That those were powerful, and just imagining our songwriting, our song style, our Metallica-ness with that production. It felt scary, but it felt right. It felt like this is the next step. This is what we need.
Maybe we don't agree with Mötley Crüe in the aesthetic or whatever, but when you listen to the opening, 48 bars of Dr. Feelgood and hear that bass thump along with the kick drum, you go, holy fuck, that's really cool.
After all the creative tension in the studio with Metallica and Bob Rock, I guess Metallica finally came to the fact that they needed help, and sometimes they don't do shit right. And as Lars said, they finally realized, yeah, we could do this producer thing, but we still should have the upper hand in decisions. And Bob would be the guy that advised and pushed them to their peaks.
At some point, it's like, okay, it was like, I think we finally realized that we could slowly start being part of this as long as it was just on our conditions. It was like, okay, we can bring somebody in as long as they're like-minded. We're not going to surrender.
And he also talked about how they matured and how they weren't babies now and don't mess with Metallica. They were in their mid-20s by then, and by nature they matured, and they knew they needed help to maneuver this new style and create the masterpiece that is the Black Album. I really liked the episode. Even though it didn't have any new info at all compared to the last one, everything they said we already knew. But making that kind of episode was kind of necessary to show people that Bob Rock is important in making Metallica who they are, and to shut these stuck in the 80s fans that talk shit about Bob. Really like also that each episode focuses on one element about the Black Album era and talks about it. It's not random. Like the last episode, they were talking about the road leading to the Black Album. And this episode, they were talking about Bob Rock. And I'm guessing the next episode would be about the songs themselves and their experiences in writing them. I know it was already released, but I haven't listened to it yet.